A plumber walks into a Brickell Avenue private bank with oil on his hands and a pipe wrench in his grip. He asks for $5 million like it's just another job that needs doing. The manager smirks, certain he's about to embarrass him, until the screen loads and the color drains from his face. Because the money is real, and the reason he needs it today is about to ruin someone's life. Welcome to Stories That Touch. Before we begin, take a moment to drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach and who they connect with. When the story ends, rate it from 0 to 10 and tell us which moment stayed with you the longest. Your reactions shape the stories we tell next. And if you're drawn to powerful stories filled with emotion, twists, and quiet truths that linger long after the final line, make sure to follow Stories That Touch so you never miss what's coming. Now take a breath, settle in, and let the story unfold. Brickell Avenue did not announce wealth with noise. It did it with surfaces. Glass that held the sky like a captive. Marble that looked too clean to be walked on. Doors that opened without creaking, as if even friction was considered impolite here. The street itself felt engineered to filter people, not just cars. The wrong shoes sounded wrong. The wrong posture looked wrong. The wrong confidence got corrected before it reached the lobby. It was late morning, the hour when the sun turned the towers into polished mirrors, and every reflection looked expensive. Valets moved like metronomes. Doormen watched like bouncers wearing silk gloves. Conversations happened in half voices. No one raised their tone, because in Brickell, the threat was never volume. It was access. The private bank sat in the ground level of a high-rise that could have been mistaken for an art museum. No visible branding from the street, only a discreet plaque at eye level and a narrow entrance framed by brass. Inside, air conditioning cooled the world down to a temperature that implied you did not sweat for a living. Jacob Miller walked in wearing sweat. Oil stained the knees of his blue coveralls. The fabric at the elbows looked permanently creased from work. The collar bore the dull gray shadow of a day spent under pipes and in crawl spaces, the kind of grime that did not wash out completely because it had become part of the job. In his left hand was a worn black tool bag. In his right was a pipe wrench, large enough that it looked wrong to carry indoors, wrong like a crowbar at a church. He held it casually anyway, not like a weapon, like a habit. The lobby registered him immediately, not by sound, because Jacob moved quietly, by disruption, by contradiction. A man like that did not walk into a place like this without a reason, and Brickell trained its people to treat unexpected things as threats. At the far side of the marble floor, behind a counter that looked like it was carved from a single slab of stone, a teller's eyes flicked up. She was young, immaculate, and practiced. Her smile formed automatically, and then paused half a second too long when she saw Jacob's hands. Tool bag, wrench, dirt. The smile tried to hold, but her body betrayed uncertainty. She glanced left, toward the glass offices where men in suits sat behind tinted doors. She glanced right, toward the lobby concierge, whose job was to intercept the wrong people before they made it to the counter. She glanced down again at Jacob's boots, like they were about to leave marks. Jacob stopped at the counter and waited without shifting his weight. He did not look around. He did not pretend not to notice the stares. He did not perform humility. He simply stood there with the quiet certainty of a man who had been underestimated so often he no longer reacted to it. The teller cleared her throat. "Good morning, sir," she said, voice polite but cautious. "How can I help you today?" Jacob set the tool bag down gently, as if the marble mattered. He kept the wrench in his hand. "I need to make a withdrawal," he said. The teller's eyes flicked to the wrench again, then back to his face. She reached for the keyboard. "Of course. Do you have your account information? Jacob nodded and slid a slim black card across the counter. It was not crumpled. It was not a prepaid card. It was matte, heavy, minimal. The kind of card that did not advertise itself because it did not need to. The teller picked it up and read the name. Her expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. Jacob watched her without blinking. She typed, and the hesitation deepened. A private bank did not run on first names and small talk. It ran on recognition. The teller's gaze moved again, more urgently now, toward the glass office at the far end. A moment later, the door opened. Barry stepped out like he belonged to the building the way marble belonged to the floor. He was mid-40s, clean-cut, wearing a charcoal suit that sat perfectly on his shoulders. His tie was a dark blue that looked like it had been chosen for a camera. His hair was combed back with precision, not vanity. His wristwatch flashed once under the lobby lights as he adjusted his cuff, a motion practiced enough to be unconscious. He walked toward the counter with the controlled pace of a man who did not like running, but enjoyed making others wait. The teller leaned slightly toward him and spoke in a lower voice. Barry did not need to lean in to hear. He leaned in anyway. It was part of the performance. His gaze landed on Jacob like a scan. Coveralls, tool bag, wrench, calm posture. No apology on his face. Barry smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who had already decided the outcome of a conversation. "Good morning," Barry said, addressing Jacob without using his name. "Can we help you?" Jacob met his eyes. "Yes," Jacob said. "I'd like to withdraw $5 million. The lobby did not gasp. Brickell did not gasp. It paused. Even the air conditioning seemed louder for a second. A couple seated in the waiting area stopped speaking. A man in loafers at the coffee station turned his head, without pretending he wasn't listening. The teller's hands froze above the keys. Barry's smile held for a beat, then widened slightly. A laugh escaped him, soft and brief, like he was trying to be polite about finding something funny. $5 million, Barry repeated, as if tasting the number. In what form? Jacob did not react. Cash, Jacob said. Barry's eyebrows rose. For clarity, Barry said, still smiling. You're requesting a $5 million cash withdrawal today. Yes. Barry looked Jacob up and down again, more slowly this time, like he was trying to locate the joke in the dirt on Jacob's knees. You're aware, Barry said, voice smooth, that withdrawals of that magnitude require scheduling, verification, procedures. I'm aware, Jacob said. Barry turned slightly toward the teller. His tone shifted into the controlled patience of someone explaining something obvious to a child. Let's pull up the account, Barry said, so we can confirm what we're working with. The teller nodded quickly, grateful for permission to proceed. Barry watched the screen as she typed. He stayed close, one hand resting on the marble, fingers spread, a posture that communicated ownership of the space. He did not look at Jacob while the data loaded. He looked at the screen, because in Barry's mind, the screen would justify him. Jacob stood still, tool bag on the counter, wrench in hand, as if he had all day. Barry's internal assumptions marched in order, neat as files in a cabinet. Wrong building, wrong man. Probably a contractor on a job upstairs who wandered into the wrong lobby. Maybe he got paid in cash and wanted to flex. Maybe he misunderstood the number. Maybe it was a prank. It was always something with people who didn't belong. Barry did not mind people. Barry minded disorder. The teller's fingers clicked. The system requested an additional credential. The teller glanced at Jacob. Sir, could you confirm your date of birth? Jacob gave it. The teller typed again. Another prompt, another verification. Barry's smile thinned, but he still held it. Private banks asked for multiple verifications. That meant nothing. The screen loaded slowly, and Barry's patience tightened. It bothered him that the system took time. It implied that the bank's machinery was doing something significant, and Barry preferred to believe significance ran through him. The account summary appeared. Barry's face did not change instantly. It changed in stages, like a mask slipping and being caught too late. First, his eyes narrowed, as if he had misread. Then he blinked once, hard. Then he leaned closer to the screen, the way a man leans closer to something that should not be true. The teller waited, unaware of what was happening inside Barry's head. She saw the numbers too, but she did not have context for why they mattered. She only knew she had never seen that many digits attached to a man wearing coveralls. Barry's mouth opened slightly, and then closed again. On the screen were accounts stacked like architecture: primary balance, secondary holdings, structured deposits, trust-linked reserves. Liquid positions that did not look like a lottery win. They looked like planning. They looked like engineering. And the total, sitting there without apology, was not 5 million. It made 5 million look like a rounding error. Barry felt his throat go dry. He checked the name on the screen. Jacob Miller. He checked the last 4 digits of the identifier. He checked again, as if the act of checking could change reality. He forced a small breath, controlled, like a man refusing to drown in public. Jacob waited. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He did not even look at the screen. He watched Barry's face with the calm attention of someone reading a pressure gauge. Barry's laugh was gone. Whatever charm he had been wearing melted off and left him exposed. For the first time since he walked out of his office, Barry did not look in control. He straightened slowly, as if posture could restore authority. "Mr. Miller," Barry said, finally using the name. Jacob said nothing. Barry swallowed. He tried to choose a tone that would allow him to pivot without admitting what everyone had just witnessed. "Of course," Barry said. "A withdrawal of that size is possible." Jacob still did not speak. Barry held his gaze on Jacob now, and the calculation began behind his eyes. Not admiration. Not respect. Assessment. If Jacob had this kind of money, Jacob had this kind of power. Not social power. Actual power. The kind that moved things. The kind that made calls matter. The kind that could ruin a man like Barry if it landed in the wrong place. And Jacob wanted 5 million in cash. Today. Barry's mind raced through possibilities with the speed of a man who had survived Brickell by staying one step ahead of risk. 5 million in cash could be anything. It could be a payoff, a purchase, a threat, a panic, a trap. It could be a test. But the thing that tightened Barry's stomach was not the money itself. It was the timing. Barry knew what was scheduled tonight. He knew which signatures were supposed to happen, which transfers were supposed to clear, which closing depended on silence and smoothness. He knew how fragile a deal could be if the wrong money moved at the wrong hour. And now a plumber with a pipe wrench was standing in his lobby, asking for $5 million as if he was ordering a coffee. Barry glanced, briefly, toward the waiting area, toward the glass doors, toward the street beyond. Then he looked back at Jacob, forcing his voice into something like professional calm. "Can you tell me," Barry said carefully, "why you need it in cash?" Jacob's face did not change. "That's not necessary," Jacob said. "I just need the withdrawal processed." Barry stared at him for a beat too long. The lobby had not erupted. No one had laughed. No one had spoken. But the silence was now different. It was no longer the silence that bullied Jacob. It was the silence watching Barry. Barry turned back to the screen again, as if looking for an escape route inside the numbers. There wasn't one. The wealth was real. The request was real. And Jacob's calm was not ignorance. It was intent. Barry felt something he did not like to feel in his own bank. Uncertainty. He kept his eyes on the balance, but his thoughts had already moved to the only question that mattered. Not how a plumber got this rich. Not whether the money was legitimate. Not whether $5 million was possible. Why today? And what would happen tonight if he said no? Barry's fingers tightened against the marble. Jacob stood motionless, pipe wrench hanging at his side like punctuation. And the chapter ended with Barry staring at the screen, understanding the first true problem was not Jacob's money. It was Jacob's timing. Barry kept his eyes on the screen because it gave him something to stare at that was not Jacob's face. Numbers had rules. People did not. Behind him, the lobby's silence had shifted. It was no longer the comfortable silence of wealth. It was the attentive silence of an audience that had sensed a crack in authority and wanted to see whether it would widen. Barry could feel it like heat at the back of his neck. He forced a breath through his nose, controlled the way he had learned to control it in meetings when a client said something unexpected. He straightened. He let his shoulders settle into the suit. The suit did what it always did. It reminded him who he was in this room. He turned to Jacob with a careful expression that could be interpreted as respect if you did not know how to read contempt. "Mr. Miller," Barry said again, more smoothly now, "thank you for your patience." Jacob's gaze remained steady. No smile, no irritation. Nothing Barry could grab. Barry hated that. People who wanted something usually leaked emotion. Their urgency leaked into their voice, or their impatience leaked into their hands. Jacob stood like a valve that had been closed deliberately. Barry moved into the tone he used with high-net-worth clients who believed they were entitled to everything simply because they could afford it. The tone implied, "I will help you, but you will not forget who controls the process." "For a cash withdrawal of this size," Barry said, "there are procedures we must follow. Verification, approvals, logistics, compliance requirements." Jacob nodded once, minimal. "I understand," Jacob said. Barry waited for more. An argument, a plea, a justification, a flex. Jacob gave nothing. Barry continued anyway. "Our standard protocol," Barry said, "requires advance notice for large cash movements, usually several business days. It's not a question of willingness, it's a question of policy." He let the word policy hang like a badge. Jacob did not flinch. "I'm not requesting a standard protocol," Jacob said. "I'm requesting a withdrawal." It was said calmly, but the difference mattered. Protocol implied permission. Withdrawal implied ownership. Barry felt irritation crawl up behind his ribs. He did not show it. "Of course," Barry said, voice softening in the way people softened when they wanted to sound reasonable while denying you something. "We can certainly process your request. It just may not be possible today." Jacob's eyes did not move. "It needs to be today," Jacob said. There it was, a sentence, a requirement. Barry finally had a thread to pull. Barry turned slightly toward the teller, as if including her in the conversation. But really, he was reasserting his position as the gate. If he made this look like a normal administrative issue, Jacob's power would shrink back into paperwork, where Barry felt safest. "Let's see what we can do," Barry said. "But I want to set expectations. Large cash withdrawals are unusual even for clients of your profile." Jacob said nothing. Barry continued. "Unusual withdrawals require a clear purpose." Jacob's expression did not change. "No, they don't." Barry held the smile that wasn't a smile. "They do here," Barry said. Jacob's silence landed like a challenge. Barry took another glance at the screen, and the discomfort returned. This was not the usual wealthy man demanding convenience. This was a tradesman, dressed like a tradesman, holding wealth that looked engineered. It did not fit any of Barry's internal categories. That was the problem with Brickell. It was not that money lied. It was that money sometimes showed up wearing the wrong clothes. Barry's mind flicked back through his own map of the world, the one that had served him well for years. People belonged in lanes. The poor were loud about being wronged. The newly rich were loud about being seen. The quietly rich were quiet because they had already won. The quietly rich never carried pipe wrenches into lobbies. They sent assistants. They scheduled meetings. They did not ask for $5 million in cash. People like Jacob did not have access to this kind of structure. Not because it was impossible, but because it was not how the system worked. And Barry's entire career rested on the belief that the system worked. Because Barry worked it. He glanced toward the glass doors leading outside, toward Brickell Avenue, where the day moved at a pace that assumed everything would go as planned. He could not afford surprises today, not with what was set to close to night, not with the capital flows that needed to move quietly, cleanly, predictably. Jacob's timing was the only thing that felt threatening. That, and the fact that Jacob looked like a man who understood pressure. Barry leaned closer to the teller's screen and tapped lightly on the counter. "Can you pull up the full client profile?" Barry murmured. The teller obeyed quickly. Barry's authority was familiar to her. Jacob was not. A secondary screen opened. Barry scanned. He expected to see something he could use, something messy. A lawsuit, a tax flag, a foreign transfer, a compliance note. Something that would justify delay and restore his dominance. Instead, he found structure. Entities layered with clean naming conventions. Trust arrangements with proper filings. Holdings allocated across low-risk instruments and liquidity reserves. A sequence of deposits that looked like royalties rather than salaries. Regular, predictable, boring. The kind of boring that made auditors relax. Barry's jaw tightened. He clicked deeper. A line item labeled as a licensing stream. Another labeled as a patent-related deposit. Another tied to a corporate acquisition 2 years ago. No drama. No chaos. No sudden spike that would suggest a windfall. This money did not happen to Jacob. Jacob built it. Barry felt unsettled in a way he did not like. It was not fear yet. It was the loss of a comfortable story. The comfortable story was that people like Jacob got lucky or got dirty. That made them manageable. Luck could be envied. Dirt could be leveraged. But this looked like competence turned into capital with paperwork strong enough to survive an attack. Barry clicked into the notes. A private banker had written a summary 2 years earlier, probably for internal use. Client prefers direct, minimal engagement, high financial literacy, low interest in social signaling, operational background, extensive IP holdings, no tolerance for unnecessary friction. Barry's eyes paused on the last line. No tolerance for unnecessary friction. Barry felt his irritation sharpen. It wasn't just that Jacob had money. It was that Jacob did not behave grateful about it. Barry had built his position by training people to want access. The moment he offered them the right kind of attention, they softened. They laughed at his jokes. They accepted his conditions. They wanted to stay in his good graces. Jacob did not want graces. Jacob wanted outcomes. Barry shut the profile view and looked back at Jacob as if Jacob had done something personally offensive by existing. "Mr. Miller," Barry said, louder now, so the lobby could hear the professionalism. "I see your accounts are in excellent standing." Jacob waited. "But," Barry continued, "a cash withdrawal of $5 million requires justification under our internal risk framework." There it was, the pivot. He had moved from mockery to policy, from mockery, which could embarrass him, to policy, which could shield him. Jacob's voice remained flat. "What part of the framework?" Barry's lips pressed together briefly. Jacob wasn't biting the bait. He was asking for the hook. Large cash movements, Barry said, are subject to heightened review. It's standard. Standard doesn't mean correct, Jacob said. Barry felt heat behind his eyes. Quirton made his voice gentler, which was always his tell when he was annoyed. This is a private bank, Barry said. We protect our clients, and we protect the institution. Jacob's gaze did not move. Protect it from what? Barry wanted to say. From people like you. He did not. He chose a different line. From risk, Barry said, as if the word explained itself. Jacob nodded once. Slow. Then document the risk. Barry blinked. Excuse me? Document the risk, Jacob repeated. If you're refusing or delaying, I want the refusal in writing. I want the policy cited. I want the basis, in plain language. Barry stared at him. This was not normal. Clients did not ask for written refusals. Clients argued, threatened to leave, called lawyers, tried to negotiate. Clients did not demand paperwork with the calm of a man ordering parts. Barry tried to regain footing. Mr. Miller, Barry said, no one is refusing you. We are simply explaining timelines. Jacob's reply was immediate. Then put the timeline in writing. Barry felt the room watching him. He heard the faint clink of a coffee cup being set down. He heard the hush of someone shifting in a chair. He did not like being watched. He liked being observed with admiration, not studied for weakness. He forced another smile. Before we go down that road, Barry said, help me understand. What is the purpose of this withdrawal? Jacob's eyes narrowed just slightly, the first visible sign of irritation. It's personal, Jacob said. Barry leaned forward a fraction. We're not asking for details, just the category. Real estate, business purchase, investment? Jacob waited a beat. No. Barry kept his tone gentle, but his patience was thinning. Mr. Miller, $5 million in cash is unusual. It raises questions. Jacob said nothing. Barry took a calculated step closer, lowering his voice into something that sounded like discretion, but was actually pressure. Let me be candid, Barry said. If you can tell me the purpose, I can expedite this. Jacob's gaze stayed on Barry. If you can process the withdrawal, you can expedite this. Barry felt the shift. Jacob wasn't just refusing to answer. He was refusing the premise that Barry's cooperation was a favor. Barry straightened. You're asking me to move an extraordinary amount of cash, Barry said, without any context. Jacob's answer was simple. I'm asking you to do your job. The teller's eyes flicked between them, nervous. She had never seen someone talk to Barry like this. Barry's smile disappeared. Not fully, just enough. Let's be clear, Barry said, voice tightening. My job is to ensure this bank operates within regulatory and internal requirements. You may be accustomed to different environments, Mr. Miller, but here we do things properly. The insult was wrapped in silk. You may be accustomed to different environments. Jacob's expression stayed neutral, but something hardened behind it. I'm accustomed to systems, Jacob said. Some work, some hide behind paperwork. Barry's jaw tightened. He glanced down briefly, then looked back up. Fine, Barry said, changing approach. We will initiate an internal review. Jacob did not react. Barry turned slightly to the teller. Flag this transaction for elevated risk review. Mark it as urgent. The teller's fingers moved, obedient. A small icon appeared on the screen. A request dispatched into the bank's internal machinery. Barry felt relief. Now the delay belonged to the system, not him. He looked back at Jacob with the controlled calm of a man who believed he had put a leash on the situation. This will take time, Barry said. Our risk team must review the request. You'll be contacted. Jacob's voice remained level. How long? Barry let a pause sit. He enjoyed pauses. Pauses reminded people who set the tempo. 24 to 48 hours, Barry said. Jacob stared at him. That doesn't work, Jacob said. Barry gave a small shrug. Then you may choose another form of withdrawal. Wire transfer. Cashier's check. Those can be executed faster. Jacob's eyes remained on Barry. No. Barry's irritation flashed. You're being inflexible, Barry said. Jacob's reply was quiet. So are you. Barry felt a flash of anger. He had offered alternatives. He had followed policy. He had done what the institution demanded. Why did this feel like he was losing? Because Jacob wasn't asking. Jacob was measuring. Barry kept his voice controlled. Mr. Miller, if you insist on cash, we cannot guarantee the timeline. Jacob nodded once, then reached into his coveralls pocket and pulled out a small notepad, the kind tradesmen carried. He clicked a pen. Barry watched him, confused. Jacob looked at Barry. Say it again. What? Say the refusal again, Jacob said. I'm writing it down. Barry's expression tightened. There is no refusal. There is a delay, Jacob said. Say the delay and the reason. I want it recorded. Barry felt the room's attention sharpening. This was turning into theater, and Barry hated theater where he wasn't the director. He lowered his voice. Mr. Miller, this is unnecessary. Jacob's pen hovered. Then it should be easy to document. Barry's nostrils flared slightly. He looked at the teller, then back at Jacob. Mr. Miller, Barry said, you are requesting a transaction that triggers enhanced due diligence. We must comply with regulations. Jacob wrote. He didn't look down. He wrote by feel, eyes still on Barry. Cite the regulation, Jacob said. Barry blinked. He had expected Jacob to be intimidated by the phrase enhanced due diligence. He had expected compliance language to shut the conversation down. Instead, Jacob treated it like a claim that needed evidence. Barry's internal monologue began to scramble for a justification. He could cite Bank Secrecy Act protocols. He could cite AML rules, but those were broad. He needed something specific to this case, something that would not look like a pretext. Barry felt a pressure he hadn't felt in years, the pressure of being questioned by someone who did not accept authority as proof of correctness. He regained composure by doing what he always did when cornered. He reframed. Mr. Miller, Barry said, if you want something in writing, we can provide a general statement that large cash withdrawals are subject to review. That's it. Jacob nodded slightly. Do it. Barry held his gaze. We'll have it prepared. When? Jacob asked. Barry's patience snapped internally, but he kept the tone. By end of day, Barry said. Jacob's pen clicked again. Good. I'll wait. Barry felt something twist. Jacob was not leaving. He was not storming out. He was not making threats. He was anchoring himself in the lobby like a stone and forcing Barry to live with the scrutiny. Barry tried a different angle, softer, more manipulative. Mr. Miller, Barry said, I'm trying to help you. If you cooperate, this goes smoother. Jacob's eyes stayed on him. If you cooperate, this goes smoother. Barry stared at him. For a brief moment, Barry saw what he had missed at first. Jacob wasn't calm because he was unsophisticated. Jacob was calm because he had already run the scenario in his head. He knew what Barry would do. He expected it. The calm was not personality. It was preparation. Barry felt the first real chill in his stomach, not fear of Jacob's money, fear of Jacob's competence. He turned slightly away from Jacob and looked back at the teller's screen, as if he could find reassurance there. But the screen only confirmed the same uncomfortable fact. Jacob's wealth was clean, not just legally clean, structurally clean. The kind of clean that suggested whoever built it understood systems better than Barry wanted to admit. Barry straightened and forced a final tone of authority. "Please have a seat," Barry said, gesturing toward the waiting area. "We will contact you when we have an update." Jacob did not move. "I'll stand," Jacob said. Barry's jaw tightened. He believed he still controlled the room. He believed policy would shield him, systems would delay Jacob, and time would force Jacob to compromise. He believed, because believing was how he stayed in power. Jacob stood there without flinching, pipe wrench in hand, like a quiet reminder of what he understood that Barry did not. Pressure builds, and at some point, something gives. Barry looked at Jacob again, and instead of mockery, he offered the faintest trace of something else. Calculation. "Mr. Miller," Barry said, voice smooth again. "We'll be in touch." Jacob nodded once. "Make sure you are." Barry turned back toward his glass office, feeling the lobby's eyes on him as he walked away. He could feel that he had not won, but he could not admit that he had lost. Not yet. Behind him, Jacob did not sit. He did not speak. He waited. And Barry told himself the same lie he had told himself for years. That silence meant ignorance. That time meant control. That a plumber could not possibly know enough about money to threaten the people who ran it. Jacob waited. He did not pace. He did not check his phone. He did not shift the pipe wrench from one hand to the other. He stood in the same place Barry had left him, shoulders relaxed, eyes forward, like a man waiting for pressure to equalize. While Barry disappeared behind glass and policy, Jacob's mind did what it always did in moments like this. It went backward, not to nostalgia, not to regret, to mechanics, to cause and effect, to the places where systems failed long before anyone admitted they were broken. He remembered his first years in the trade, when he was still learning how to read buildings the way other people read faces. Back then, he thought plumbing was about pipes. He learned quickly it was about lies. Every large building lied in the same way. On the surface, everything looked finished. Dry walls clean, floors polished, mechanical rooms locked and labeled, maintenance logs stamped and filed. But behind the walls, behind the ceilings, pressure behaved differently. Water did not respect budgets or schedules. It respected physics. Leaks started small. A pinhole fracture in a copper joint. A hairline crack in an aging pipe. A valve tightened one turn too far by someone rushing through a checklist. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that tripped alarms. Just enough moisture to soak insulation, to swell drywall, to invite mold into places no one looked until it was too late. Jacob had spent years crawling through ceiling voids and service shafts in buildings that cost more per square foot than he would earn in a year. He watched property managers blame contractors, contractors blame materials, engineers blame usage. Everyone blamed the person below them. No one blamed the system. The worst calls were the emergency ones, the ones that came at 3 in the morning when water had already done its work. Server rooms flooded, elevators down, luxury condos with water pouring through recessed lighting like rain from a ceiling that had never been tested. Jacob would arrive with his tools and hear the same sentence every time. We had no idea. They always had logs, inspections, reports, sensors that measured everything except what mattered. The waste bothered him, but not because of money, because it was avoidable, because the signs were always there, ignored because no one wanted to look behind walls. That frustration followed him job to job, city to city, until it collided with something worse, the demolition. It was an old mixed-use block, scheduled for redevelopment, small businesses on the ground floor, offices above, the kind of place that didn't look important enough to protect. Jacob was not the lead contractor. He was brought in late, asked to disconnect lines and make sure nothing went wrong before the heavy machines moved in. Something went wrong anyway. A support structure failed earlier than planned. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough for debris to fall where it wasn't supposed to. Enough for a man named Frank to be in the wrong place at the wrong second. Frank had taught Jacob most of what he knew, not just about plumbing, but about patience, about listening to buildings, about doing things right even when no one was watching. Frank never walked without a limp after that day. The investigation was quick, too quick. Reports cited unforeseen structural weakness. Insurance paid out just enough to close the file. The redevelopment continued. The firms involved moved on. Frank did not. He spent his remaining years in pain, living on settlements that barely covered medical costs, watching luxury towers rise where his livelihood once stood. He never complained. He just shook his head whenever Jacob mentioned lawyers or appeals. "They don't lose," Frank had said once. "They just wait you out." Jacob did not forget that. He carried it with him into every mechanical room and crawl space afterward. Every time he watched a building fail slowly, while everyone pretended it wasn't happening, the same thought returned. The system rewarded ignorance. So Jacob started measuring what no one else bothered to. At first it was crude. Pressure gauges installed where they weren't supposed to be. Moisture sensors taped behind panels. Temperature readings logged over time. Patterns emerged. Buildings spoke when you listened long enough. Leaks were not random. They were predictable. Pressure changes, thermal expansion, material fatigue. All of it followed rules. No one tracked those rules because tracking them didn't look impressive. It didn't photograph well. It didn't sell condos. Jacob began sketching ideas on job invoices. Simple algorithms at first. If pressure fluctuated here, failure followed there. If moisture increased over time in a closed system, something upstream was wrong. He showed the sketches to engineers. They smiled politely. He showed them to property managers. They nodded and forgot. When he pitched the idea to investors, the rejection was faster. They did not reject the concept. They rejected him. Too blue-collar, too operational. No formal engineering degree, no pedigree, no polish. One investor suggested he hire a real CEO and step aside. Jacob walked out without arguing. He built the prototype himself. It was ugly. Sensors wired together in ways that would make a manufacturing consultant cringe. Software written at night after 12-hour shifts. Data stored on servers he barely trusted. But it worked. It predicted failures weeks before they happened. The first building that installed the system saved millions in avoided damage. The second signed a long-term contract. The third told another. Word spread quietly, the way effective things often do. Jacob filed patents, not because he cared about ownership, but because he had learned what happened to ideas without protection. He licensed the technology instead of selling it outright. He insisted on data access clauses. He retained royalties. When a large firm finally offered to acquire the company, Jacob sold equity, but not control of the core intellectual property. He let them scale it. He kept the engine. The checks arrived monthly. Predictable. Boring. Clean. Jacob never upgraded his wardrobe. He never hired an assistant. He never stopped taking jobs when he felt like working. Money was not the point. Leverage was. Now, standing in a private bank lobby that smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and quiet superiority, Jacob let the memories settle and pass. Frank would have laughed at this place. He would have pointed at the marble and said it cracked the same as anything else under enough pressure. Jacob glanced toward Barry's glass office. He could see Barry moving inside, gesturing, making calls. Barry still thought this was a standoff he could manage. Barry still thought Jacob was bluffing. Jacob adjusted his grip on the pipe wrench slightly, not out of threat, but habit. It grounded him, reminded him where his understanding came from. Systems always failed at the joints. Behind the glass, Barry believed silence meant ignorance. Out in the open, Jacob knew silence meant readiness. The lobby hummed softly around him, unaware that the man they had judged by his clothes had already mapped the building, the deal, and the pressure points that mattered. And when Barry finally stepped back out, wearing the same suit and the same confidence, Jacob was still there. Waiting. Not for permission, for the moment when the system would reveal what it always did under stress, where it leaked air. Barry closed the glass door behind him and let the sound seal. Inside his office, the air felt different, thicker, like the room itself understood that something had slipped past him in the lobby. He loosened his tie a fraction and walked to his desk, not sitting down immediately. He stared through the tinted glass at Jacob, still standing where he had been left, still holding the pipe wrench like it belonged there. That was the first irritation. Jacob had not moved. Most people would have sat, or paced, or checked their phone. Jacob stood as if he were part of the architecture now, an inconvenient pillar that could not be ignored. Barry turned away and picked up the phone. He did not call his assistant. He did not call a colleague. He dialed a number that did not appear in any directory and waited through 2 rings before someone answered. "Risk," a voice said, clipped and neutral. "This is Barry," he replied. "Brickle?" A pause, then recognition. "I have a situation," Barry said. "High-value cash withdrawal, $5 million. Client insists on same-day release." "Profile?" the voice asked. Barry hesitated just long enough to choose his framing. "Blue-collar presentation," Barry said. "Unusual urgency. No declared purpose. Requests cash specifically." Another pause. Keyboard sounds. "Name?" the voice asked. Barry gave it. The pause lengthened. Barry felt irritation rise again. He disliked pauses that were not his. "Accounts are clean," the voice said finally. "No immediate flags." Barry's jaw tightened. "Yes," Barry said, "but the behavior is inconsistent with profile." Silence. "Meaning?" the voice asked. Barry leaned back against his desk and stared at the ceiling as if organizing his thoughts. He was careful here. Compliance did not like opinions. They liked implications. "Client insists on cash," Barry said. "Refuses to provide context. Pressuring timeline. Appears to be testing process. Boundaries." The voice did not respond immediately. "Is there a regulatory trigger?" the voice asked. Barry chose his words carefully. "Potential reputational exposure," he said, "if mishandled." That did it. Reputational exposure was the phrase that opened doors. It implied press. It implied scrutiny. It implied risk that did not show up on spreadsheets. "All right," the voice said. "We can initiate enhanced review." Barry exhaled slowly. "Do it." "Document your interactions," the voice added. "Do not escalate without cause." Barry hung up before the sentence finished. He placed the phone down and looked through the glass again. Jacob had not moved. Barry felt a small sense of satisfaction. The system was doing what it was supposed to do. Slowing things down, absorbing pressure, buying time. Time mattered tonight. Barry walked to the window overlooking Brickell Avenue. From here, the street looked orderly, predictable. Cars moved when lights told them to. People crossed where they were supposed to cross. Capital flowed invisibly, guided by signals only a few understood. Barry was one of those few. The redevelopment deal had been in motion for months, a cluster of aging low-rise buildings scheduled for acquisition. Small trades, service businesses, places that paid rent on time but did not generate headlines. The plan was simple. Consolidate ownership, apply pressure. Offer buyouts framed as opportunities. When resistance collapsed, redevelop. It was not illegal. It was efficient. Barry's role had been subtle. He did not sign contracts. He did not appear on documents. He advised. He facilitated. He made sure the right capital moved smoothly at the right time. Banks did not just hold money. They whispered. Large withdrawals, large deposits, sudden shifts. Patterns spoke louder than conversations. Barry knew which movements signaled confidence and which signaled fear. He knew how to read when a seller was about to fold and when a buyer was desperate. And tonight, everything was supposed to align, which was why Jacob's request bothered him. $5 million in cash did not make sense on its own. But $5 million moving out of a structured account on the day of closing created noise. Noise attracted attention. Attention delayed deals. Barry's eyes narrowed. Jacob might be playing leverage, but leverage required understanding. And Barry did not believe a plumber understood capital choreography at this level. Still, the timing was wrong. Barry turned back toward his desk and opened a secondary terminal, one not visible to the lobby. He accessed internal flow summaries. No names, just movement. There it was. A projected inflow scheduled for late afternoon. Quiet. Clean. A transfer that would tip a balance and finalize an escrow condition. Barry stared at the timestamp. Jacob's withdrawal request overlapped it almost exactly. Barry felt a prickle at the base of his neck. Coincidence was rare in Brickell. He dismissed the thought. Plenty of people moved money. Timing overlapped all the time. Jacob was probably acting on impulse, intoxicated by his own balance and unaware of the machinery around him. Barry closed the terminal and straightened his jacket. He stepped out of the office. The lobby felt different now. Quieter. Tenser. The teller avoided his eyes. Jacob's gaze met his immediately. Barry walked toward the counter with renewed composure. He had policy on his side. He had compliance engaged. He had time. "Mr. Miller," Barry said, voice even. "We've initiated a review. As I mentioned, this may take some time." Jacob nodded slowly. "I expected that." The words landed heavier than they should have. Barry ignored the discomfort. "I'll need you to wait while our risk team evaluates the request." Jacob's eyes flicked briefly to the glass office, then back to Barry. "How long?" Barry did not answer directly. "We'll update you." Jacob studied him for a moment, as if watching pressure build in a gauge. "You flagged this as suspicious," Jacob said. Barry stiffened. "We flagged it as unusual." Jacob tilted his head slightly. "Based on what?" Barry's patience thinned. "Based on standard indicators." Jacob did not argue. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Barry felt a small spike of irritation. "Phones aren't permitted at the counter," he said automatically. "I'm not recording," Jacob replied. "I'm scheduling." He unlocked the phone and tapped twice. Barry watched, unsettled by how unbothered Jacob seemed by the delay. Jacob raised the phone to his ear. "Hi," Jacob said. "Yes. I'm at the bank. They've initiated an enhanced review. Can you loop in audit and keep the call open?" Barry felt a flicker of annoyance turn into something colder. "Who are you calling?" Barry asked. Jacob did not lower the phone. "My auditors." Barry's jaw tightened. Jacob continued, voice calm. "Yes, Brickell Avenue. I'll hold." He ended the call and placed the phone back in his pocket. Barry stared at him. "Auditors? Yes?" Barry let out a short laugh. "That seems excessive." Jacob shrugged slightly. "So does delaying a legitimate withdrawal." Barry felt the balance of the room tilt. Not dramatically, just enough. "Mr. Miller," Barry said, lowering his voice, "this isn't adversarial." Jacob met his eyes. "It became adversarial when you framed it as suspicious." Barry bristled. "We are protecting the institution." Jacob nodded. "That's what institutions say." Barry felt the words strike closer than he liked. He glanced toward the teller, then back at Jacob. "You have to understand," Barry said. "Large movements attract attention." Jacob's response was immediate. "That's why I'm making one." Barry froze for half a second. The words settled. That was not ignorance. That was intent. Barry's mind forced, again, faster now. If Jacob understood attention, he understood leverage. And if he understood leverage, he was not here by accident. Barry tried to maintain control. "If this is about making a point," he said, "there are better ways." Jacob's gaze did not soften. "This is the right way." Barry felt something shift inside him, a crack in the narrative he had built around Jacob. "What do you want?" Barry asked, too sharply. Jacob did not answer immediately. He looked around the lobby, at the marble, the glass, the quiet watchers. "I want the withdrawal processed," Jacob said. "Today." Barry clenched his jaw. "That may not be possible," he said. Jacob nodded again, as if ticking off a box. "Then we'll see how the review goes." Barry forced a smile. "That's all we can do." Jacob said nothing more. Barry turned away, walking back toward his office with a measured pace. He told himself this was still under control, that the system would slow Jacob down. That time would work in his favor. But as he reached the door, he felt it. The first real flicker of fear. Not of Jacob. Of what Jacob understood about timing. Because institutions were only neutral until someone learned how to lean on them. And Jacob Miller looked like a man who knew exactly where to apply pressure. Barry did not return to his office this time. He stopped halfway across the lobby, turned, and walked back to the counter with a purpose that was meant to look procedural rather than reactive. He held a thin tablet now, the kind executives used when they wanted to signal that something had moved from conversation into process. "Mr. Miller," Barry said, voice even, "I'm going to formalize the review." Jacob looked at the tablet, then back at Barry. "Define formalize." Barry tapped at the screen once. "We're placing a temporary hold on the withdrawal pending enhanced compliance review." The words were chosen carefully. Temporary, pending, enhanced. None of them meant no. All of them meant delay. Jacob nodded. "Put it in writing." Barry blinked. "Excuse me?" "You said you're placing a hold," Jacob replied. "I want the notice, with the policy cited." Barry felt irritation flare again, sharp and fast. He had expected resistance, not audit-level pushback. "This is internal," Barry said. "We don't usually issue written notices for," Jacob interrupted gently. "Then don't usually do it today. But you're doing it now." Barry's lips pressed together. The teller glanced up, eyes wide, sensing that this was no longer a routine interaction. "Mr. Miller," Barry said, lowering his voice, "this is not how these things work." Jacob's voice remained level. "It is when someone invokes policy to restrict access to their own funds." Barry felt the attention of the lobby coalesce around them. He could sense it without looking. People leaned without leaning, listened without appearing to listen. "Fine," Barry said. "I'll summarize the basis verbally." Jacob shook his head once. "Written." Barry stared at him. "Why?" "So there's no confusion later," Jacob said. Barry felt a tightness in his chest. Later was exactly what he was trying to avoid. He tapped the tablet again, faster now, pulling up a generic compliance template. The language was vague by design. It worked because most clients never challenged it. "Enhanced due diligence is triggered under," Barry began. Jacob raised his phone. The movement was unhurried, but it cut through the space like a blade. Barry stopped speaking. "What are you doing?" Barry asked. "Recording," Jacob said. Barry's irritation flared into something hotter. "You can't record inside the bank." Jacob's eyes met his. "I can record my own interaction." Barry glanced at the teller, then toward the glass office, calculating. "This is unnecessary," Barry said. Jacob did not lower the phone. "Then it should be easy to explain." Barry felt the pressure mount. The compliance template stared back at him, useless without specifics. He tried again. "Mr. Miller, we have an obligation under federal regulations to monitor." "Which regulation?" Jacob asked. Barry hesitated. "The Bank Secrecy Act," Barry said, choosing the broadest shield available. Jacob nodded slowly. "Which section?" Barry's jaw tightened. He could feel sweat forming under his collar now, invisible but present. "Anti-money laundering provisions," Barry said. Jacob kept the phone steady. "Which provision?" Barry's internal monologue began to race. He knew the regulations. He had passed every exam. He had sat through every training. But those rules were designed to be applied to patterns, not individuals with clean accounts and documented sources of funds. Applying them here was possible, but it required justification he did not have. He tried to pivot. "Your insistence on cash is unusual," Barry said. "That alone can trigger review." Jacob's reply came immediately. "Unusual is not illegal." Barry's throat tightened. "And your refusal to provide context," Barry added. Jacob nodded. "I'm not required to." Barry could hear his own voice tightening despite his effort to keep it smooth. "We're not accusing you of anything," Barry said. "Then why are you freezing the transaction?" Jacob asked. Barry paused. The silence stretched. The lobby waited. Barry felt the moment slipping. He tried to regain ground by shifting to authority. "Because I'm responsible for this branch," Barry said, "and I'm exercising discretion." Jacob lowered the phone slightly. "Discretion isn't policy." Barry's eyes flicked to the teller again. She was watching openly now, hands still, no longer pretending this was normal. Barry tried to salvage the moment. "All right," he said. "Let's be precise." He straightened, adopting the tone of a man reading from a rulebook. "Under internal risk protocols aligned with federal guidelines, the bank reserves the right to delay large cash withdrawals that present heightened risk indicators." Jacob nodded, phone still up. "List the indicators." Barry swallowed. "Urgency," Barry said. "Cash, preference, refusal to state purpose." Jacob's gaze remained steady. "Those are behaviors, not risks," Barry snapped just a fraction. "They're risk factors." Jacob's voice did not rise. "Then cite the document that defines them as such." Barry felt his control slipping through his fingers like water. Every answer created another question. Every generality collapsed under scrutiny. He tried a different tactic. "Mr. Miller," Barry said, "you're creating a scene." Jacob glanced around the lobby. "I'm responding to one." Barry felt heat rush to his face. He tried to end it. "The hold stands," Barry said. "We'll notify you when the review concludes." Jacob did not lower the phone. "Then state clearly," Jacob said, "that you are denying a same-day withdrawal of $5 million from an account you've acknowledged is in good standing." Barry hesitated. Denying was stronger than delaying. Denial carried weight. Denial could be challenged. "We're not denying," Barry said. "Then process it," Jacob replied. Barry felt trapped between two unacceptable options. He looked toward the glass office again, searching for support that was not coming. Compliance would not step in publicly. They never did. Security might, but that would escalate things in ways that could not be controlled. Barry chose escalation anyway. He tapped his earpiece lightly. "Security to the lobby," he said, voice controlled. The effect was immediate. The room stiffened. The teller's eyes widened. A man in the waiting area straightened, suddenly alert. Jacob did not move. He lowered the phone slightly, just enough to look directly at Barry. "You're escalating," Jacob said. Barry held his gaze. "You're disrupting operations." Jacob's mouth twitched, almost a smile. 2 uniformed security officers appeared from the side corridor, moving with the confidence of men used to compliance rather than confrontation. "Gentlemen," Barry said, gesturing subtly toward Jacob, "we have a client refusing to cooperate with bank procedures." The officers looked at Jacob, then at Barry. Jacob raised the phone again, deliberately. "Before you do anything," Jacob said calmly, "I'd like to state for the record that I am a client in good standing, requesting access to my own funds, and that the branch manager is refusing to provide a written basis for the delay." The officers hesitated. Barry felt irritation spike into panic. "Sir," one officer said, uncertain, "we just need to ensure—" "I'm not leaving," Jacob said, voice steady. "I'm waiting," Barry interjected. "He's recording." "I'm documenting," Jacob said. Barry snapped. "That's enough." He turned back to the teller. "Place a full freeze on the account pending review." The words came out faster than he intended. The teller froze, fingers hovering above the keyboard. "Barry," she said, quietly, "I need authorization for that." Barry waved a hand. "I authorize it." The room went still. Jacob lowered the phone slightly, eyes sharp now. "Repeat that," Jacob said. Barry felt something cold slide down his spine. "You just ordered a full account freeze," Jacob continued, "without written cause." Barry realized too late what he had done. A full freeze was not a delay. It was an action. It required documentation, escalation, and justification that would be scrutinized far beyond this lobby. Barry had crossed from procedural maneuvering into formal denial. He forced a smile, trying to recover. "Temporary measure," he said. Jacob nodded slowly, phone still recording. "And the basis?" Barry opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He had made the mistake Jacob had been waiting for. He had acted before documenting. The security officers exchanged a glance. The teller looked down at the screen, then back up at Barry, uncertainty written on her face. Jacob's voice was calm, almost kind. "Thank you," he said. "That's all I needed." Barry stared at him, the realization dawning too late. In trying to choke the process, he had put his hands directly on it. And now the system would record exactly where the pressure came from. Barry stared at Jacob as if the lobby floor had shifted. The words hung between them, simple and lethal. "Thank you. That's all I needed." Barry's mind tried to reject what his instincts already understood. Jacob had not come here to withdraw cash. He had come here to force Barry into a recorded mistake. Barry glanced at the teller, at the security officers, at the few clients who were no longer pretending not to watch. He felt heat behind his eyes. He forced his face back into something like control. "Mr. Miller," Barry said, voice tight, "you're misunderstanding. No one is freezing anything. We're following protocol." Jacob lowered the phone fully now. He did not need to record anymore. The moment had been captured. "Then follow it properly," Jacob said. Barry swallowed. "What do you want?" Jacob looked at him for a long beat, then shifted his weight slightly, stepping closer to the counter. Not aggressively, deliberately, like someone adjusting position to speak over a machine's noise. "I want to talk to you," Jacob said, "privately." Barry's eyes narrowed. "We can schedule a meeting." "No," Jacob replied. "Now." Barry hesitated. Part of him wanted to refuse on principle. Another part felt the pressure of what he had just done. The freeze order, the lack of documentation, the recording. Those were not harmless. Barry turned to the security officers. "Give us a minute," he said. They hesitated, then stepped back a few paces. Not leaving, just giving space. Barry gestured toward his glass office. "Fine," he said. "Come in." Jacob picked up his tool bag. The pipe wrench stayed in his hand, not raised, not threatening, simply present. They walked across the marble floor. Barry's stride was quick, too quick. and he hated that Jacob did not match his pace. Jacob moved at his own tempo. Barry had always measured dominance through speed. Jacob did not. Inside the office, Barry closed the door and turned the tint darker with a switch. The lobby faded into a blur of shapes. Privacy returned, but it did not restore control. Barry leaned back against his desk, arms folding instinctively. "All right," he said. "Talk." Jacob did not sit. He stood by the chair opposite Barry's desk, tool bag at his feet, pipe wrench hanging loosely at his side. He did not place the wrench down. The choice was deliberate. It reminded Barry that Jacob lived in a world where tools were honest. Barry tried to reclaim the narrative. "You're putting the bank in a difficult position," Barry said. "You walked in with a—" His eyes flicked to the wrench. "With a display, demanded cash, recorded staff, and then baited me." Jacob's expression stayed flat. "Yes." Barry blinked. "Yes." "Yes," Jacob repeated. "I baited you, because you would do what you just did." Barry's jaw tightened. "And why exactly would I do that?" Jacob held his gaze. "Because the bank isn't neutral," Jacob said. Barry laughed once, harsh. "That's your story." Jacob's voice stayed calm. "It's the truth." Barry stepped forward slightly, his confidence rebuilding around anger. "You don't understand how financial institutions work." Jacob's eyes did not move. "I understand how pressure works." Barry stared at him. Jacob continued. "You made a mistake. You touched my account without cause. Now you're nervous because you know that creates a trail. The question is why you needed to touch it in the first place." Barry's throat tightened. He tried to shift the conversation away from himself. "What is this about?" Barry asked. "If you want attention, you've got it. If you want to threaten me, spare the theater and say it." Jacob's gaze narrowed slightly. "This is about Brickell," Jacob said. Barry's face held, but the muscles around his eyes tightened. "Brickell is a street," Barry said. Jacob did not react to the deflection. "Tonight," Jacob said, "a predatory acquisition closes." Barry's laughter sounded more forced now. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Jacob nodded as if expecting the lie. "A cluster of buildings near the river," Jacob continued. "Old trades, small contractors, family shops, HVACs, plumbing supply, electricians, the kind of businesses that keep this city running but don't look good in a developer's brochure." Barry's eyes flicked, just once, involuntary. Jacob saw it. "By tomorrow," Jacob said, "they'll have eviction notices dressed as redevelopment opportunities. A buyout offer designed to look generous until you read the clauses. Then the rent spikes. Then the lease terminations. Then the block becomes glass, marble, and empty promises." Barry's jaw tightened. "That's capitalism." Jacob's voice stayed steady. "It's a kill." Barry felt anger rise again. "You're sentimental." Jacob shook his head. "Once. I'm mechanical." Barry frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I can trace cause and effect," Jacob said. "And I traced this." Barry's pulse ticked faster. He masked it with disdain. "You're telling me you walked in here," Barry said, "to stop a real estate deal?" Jacob's eyes stayed on him. "I walked in here to stop your deal." Barry froze for half a beat. Then he leaned forward, voice low and sharp. "You don't know what you're saying." Jacob reached into his tool bag and pulled out a slim folder, thick with paper, tabs visible along the edge. It looked out of place in his hands, not because Jacob looked incapable, but because folders like that were usually carried by lawyers and bankers in suits. Jacob placed it on Barry's desk without ceremony. Barry stared at it. "What's that?" Barry asked. Jacob didn't answer immediately. He slid the folder closer, just an inch, like a man sliding a wrench across a workbench. Open it, Jacob said. Barry hesitated. That hesitation was a confession. Not complete, but enough. Barry's fingers touched the folder and flipped it open. The first page was a timeline. Dates and transactions mapped like a flow diagram. Entities listed in neat columns. Transfers, escrows, consulting fees, notes, guarantees. Barry's eyes scanned quickly, then slowed. He recognized names. Not his name. Not directly. The names that sat one layer beneath him. The names that moved money quietly so men like Barry could pretend they were simply advisors. Barry's throat went dry. Jacob watched him. Barry turned a page. A signature block stared back at him. Barry's own signature. Not on a purchase contract. Not on an acquisition agreement. On an internal authorization linked to an escrow condition. Barry's hand tightened on the paper. "How did you get this?" Barry demanded. Jacob's voice stayed calm. "You built a system that leaks." Barry slammed the folder shut, then immediately opened it again, as if he couldn't help himself. He flipped pages faster now, scanning like he could find an error that would save him. There wasn't one. Jacob spoke quietly, each sentence placed carefully. "The acquisition is routed through layered LLCs," Jacob said. "A parent entity, 3 shells. A credit note to a private lender that isn't really a lender, just a conduit. A secondary escrow that routes fees through a consulting entity." Barry looked up, eyes sharp. "You don't know what those words mean." Jacob did not blink. "I know exactly what they mean." Barry's jaw clenched. Jacob continued. "You designed it so no one sees the whole structure unless they trace it end to end. You designed it so anyone who complains sounds paranoid. And you designed it so the moment someone tries to intervene, you can say it's normal business." Barry's voice shook slightly with controlled rage. "This is theft. How did you obtain confidential banking information?" Jacob's expression did not change. "You're not listening. The folder isn't the threat." Barry stared at him. Jacob leaned forward slightly, the first time he had moved like an aggressor, but his voice did not rise. "The threat is what happens when this goes to regulators with today's recording attached," Jacob said. "You ordering a freeze without cause. You invoking compliance as a weapon. You attempting to block a lawful withdrawal because it interferes with a private interest." Barry's face tightened. "You have no proof of that," Barry said. Jacob nodded once. "Correct." "Not yet." Barry's eyes narrowed. "So you're bluffing?" Jacob's gaze stayed steady. "No. I'm offering you a choice." Barry's chest rose and fell more noticeably now. He hated choices presented by people beneath him. He hated the implication that he could be cornered. "What choice?" Barry asked, voice tight. Jacob pointed at the folder. "This deal closes tonight," Jacob said. "There's an escrow trigger scheduled for late afternoon. Money moves, signatures land, people get displaced. Quietly." Barry's lips pressed into a thin line. "My $5 million," Jacob continued, "is a competing escrow. It funds an alternative purchase structure that blocks your acquisition at the last moment. It buys the block long enough to restructure the leases and protect the tradespeople." Barry stared. "So you were trying to hijack," Jacob cut in. "I'm stopping a theft." Barry's face hardened. "You can't do that." Jacob tilted his head slightly. "I already am." Barry's mind raced. If Jacob funded an alternative escrow today, it could destabilize the closing. It could force delays. It could attract attention. It could cause investors to step back. It could collapse the entire structure Barry had been building. Barry's voice dropped. "Why do you care about those businesses?" Jacob's eyes sharpened, for the first time with something personal. "Because I'm one of them," Jacob said. "And because the last time a redevelopment machine did this, someone I cared about got crushed." Barry's face tightened. but he tried to hide recognition. Jacob watched him. "You remember," Jacob said. Barry snapped. "I remember nothing." Jacob nodded once. "That's consistent." Barry's anger surged. "You think you can walk in here dressed like a mechanic and threaten me with paperwork?" Jacob's voice stayed calm. "I think you've confused presentation with power." Barry slammed his palm lightly on the desk, controlled but loud enough to feel like a command. "You will not get that cash today," Barry said. "Not through me." Jacob's expression did not change. "I expected that," Jacob said. Barry narrowed his eyes. "Then why are you here?" Jacob leaned in, just a little closer, lowering his voice so it felt like a private truth. "Because I'm giving you an off-ramp," Jacob said. "Approve the withdrawal cleanly, reverse the freeze order, put your refusal in writing if you won't, and step away from the deal." Barry laughed, but it sounded brittle. "You want me to step away?" Barry said. "From a deal I'm not involved in." Jacob nodded slowly. "Then it should be easy." Barry's face twisted with anger. "You don't get to tell me what to do." Jacob's eyes stayed steady. "You're right. I don't." Barry exhaled sharply, regaining composure through ego. "You're a plumber," Barry said, each word sharpened. "You got lucky. You made some money. That doesn't mean you understand the world you're stepping into." Jacob stared at him without blinking. "I understand enough," Jacob said, "to know that your world runs on fear of attention." Barry's jaw tightened. "You think regulators will care about your sob story?" Jacob shook his head. "Not my story. Your recording." Barry felt a pulse of alarm, quickly smothered. "You won't do it," Barry said, though he didn't fully believe it. Jacob nodded. "I will." Barry's arrogance rose like armor. "Then do it," Barry said. "Let's see what happens." He stood straighter now, as if height could change reality. Jacob looked at him for a long beat. Then he picked up the folder, slid it back into his tool bag, and lifted the bag off the floor. "Good," Jacob said quietly. "You chose." Barry's eyes narrowed. "Chose what?" Jacob's voice was calm, almost indifferent. "Collapse," he said. Barry felt anger flare, but beneath it, something else surfaced. A thin, sharp fear. Because in that moment, Barry realized Jacob wasn't negotiating from hope. Jacob was executing a plan. And Barry had just refused the only exit that left him with dignity. Barry opened the office door with more force than necessary. The sound cut through the lobby like a dropped tray. Every head turned. Jacob stepped out behind him, tool bag in hand, pipe wrench still visible, his posture unchanged. He did not rush. He did not slow down. He moved like a man who had finished a conversation and was now waiting for consequences. Barry raised his voice, just enough to command the room. "Security," he said. "Now." The two officers who had lingered at the edge of the lobby moved immediately. Their shoes made soft, controlled sounds against the marble as they approached, trained to project authority without chaos. Barry pointed toward Jacob. "This client is interfering with operations and refusing to comply with bank procedures." Jacob stopped walking and turned slightly so that everyone could see him. Then he raised his phone. This time, there was no attempt to hide it. "I'm recording," Jacob said clearly, "for transparency." Barry felt heat surge up his neck. "You can't do that." "I can," Jacob replied. "And I am." The officers hesitated again. The hesitation was small, but it mattered. Barry noticed it and felt something inside him tighten. "This is a private institution," Barry said sharply. "You are creating a disturbance." Jacob looked around the lobby. "I'm standing." A murmur rippled through the space. Quiet, restrained, but unmistakable. People were no longer pretending to be absorbed in their phones or paperwork. They were watching. Barry took a step closer to the officers. Remove him." The officers looked at Jacob, then at Barry, then at the teller, who had gone very still. "Sir," one of the officers said carefully, "we just need to understand the situation." Jacob spoke before Barry could interrupt. "I am a client in good standing," Jacob said, voice steady and audible. "I requested a lawful withdrawal. The branch manager initiated a freeze without written cause. I asked for documentation. He refused." Barry snapped. "That's not accurate." Jacob did not look at him. "It's recorded." The word hung in the air. A man seated near the windows leaned forward slightly, squinting at Jacob. He was dressed expensively, casually, the kind of wealth that did not need to announce itself. He frowned, then his eyes widened. "Wait," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "Jacob Miller?" Jacob did not turn. The man stood halfway, uncertainty flickering across his face. "The Miller Systems guy?" Barry's stomach dropped. The whisper was soft, but it carried. "Miller Systems," someone else murmured. Another voice, lower. "The plumbing diagnostics company." Barry felt the room tilt. Jacob turned then, just enough to acknowledge the man with a nod. No smile, no introduction, just confirmation. The effect was immediate. Phones came out, discreetly at first, then less so. Barry felt his authority thinning, leaking out of him like pressure, escaping a cracked valve. "That's irrelevant," Barry snapped. "Security, do your job." The officers shifted again. Their posture changed, subtle but telling. Less certainty, more caution. "Sir," one of them said to Barry, "this looks like a banking matter." Barry's voice rose. "I am the branch manager." Jacob's phone angled slightly toward Barry. "Say that again." Barry froze for a fraction of a second. He realized too late that every word now mattered. "This is ridiculous," Barry said, forcing a laugh that landed badly. "We are simply following compliance." Jacob nodded. "Then it should be easy to explain." Barry felt sweat at his temples now. He glanced toward the glass office, as if expecting reinforcement to materialize. Instead, his phone vibrated. Once. Twice. He pulled it out without thinking, and saw the internal caller ID. Risk. Barry felt a surge of relief. He answered immediately. "Yes." The lobby went quiet enough that his voice carried. "This is Barry," he said. "Brickell." There was a pause. Then the voice on the other end spoke, louder than Barry expected. "Barry, step away from the terminal." Barry blinked. "Excuse me?" "Step away from all systems," the voice repeated. "Effective immediately." Barry's breath caught. "This is about a routine review." "Barry," the voice said, firmer now. "An internal investigation has been opened regarding conflict of interest and procedural irregularities." Barry felt the blood drain from his face. "This is a mistake," he said quickly. "I need context." "You'll be contacted," the voice replied. "Do not access client accounts." The call ended. Barry stood there, phone still pressed to his ear, staring at nothing. The silence was total now. Jacob lowered his phone slightly but didn't stop recording. The teller looked up at Barry, eyes wide and uncertain. "Barry," she said quietly, "my screen just locked." Barry's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The officer stepped back, instinctively creating space around Barry rather than Jacob. A low murmur spread through the lobby, no longer whispers now. Recognition, speculation, the sound of a narrative forming in real time. Barry's shoulders sagged, just a fraction. Enough. He tried to salvage something. "This is temporary," he said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Jacob stepped forward, calm as ever. "For the record," Jacob said, "I did not ask for this." Barry looked at him, eyes burning with humiliation and rage. Jacob continued, voice level. I asked for access to my money. The teller's screen chimed softly. A new prompt appeared. She looked at it, then at Jacob. "The withdrawal," she said, almost whispering. "It's approved." Barry's knees felt weak. Jacob nodded once. "Thank you." He turned to leave, walking past Barry without another word. As he reached the doors, Barry finally found his voice. "This isn't over," Barry said. Jacob stopped, turned just enough to look back. "No," Jacob said. "It is." He pushed the doors open and stepped out onto Brickell Avenue, the sunlight washing over him like nothing had happened. Inside, Barry stood alone, surrounded by marble, glass, and the quiet knowledge that his power had evaporated in front of everyone who mattered. Silence had turned against him, and it was relentless. Jacob stood just inside the doors for a moment, letting the air conditioning fade from his skin. Brickell sunlight hit differently than bank lighting. It didn't flatter. It didn't soften edges. It made everything sharp. Glass towers reflected the world back at itself, and on the street, nothing looked dramatic enough to match what had just happened inside. Cars still moved. Valets still opened doors. People still spoke in half voices. The city did not pause for moral reckoning. Jacob turned back toward the lobby through the glass. He could see it like an aquarium now, expensive calm interrupted by a man who no longer belonged behind the counter. Barry stood near the marble, shoulders rigid, face pale. His mouth moved as if speaking to someone, but no one seemed to be listening. A risk officer was probably already in motion, unseen, the way the real power always moved. Jacob did not linger. He pushed the doors open again and walked back in, not because he wanted to confront Barry, but because the withdrawal still had to be completed. The system had shifted against Barry, but systems still required signatures. Inside, the lobby had reorganized itself around the new fact. The teller's posture was different. Less fear, more precision. A senior staff member had appeared behind her, someone older with a composed face and a badge that signaled authority without needing to raise a voice. The security officers had moved to the side and were now standing like decoration. The clients in the seating area watched quietly. Some had returned to their phones, but their eyes lifted every few seconds, not for entertainment, for confirmation. Jacob approached the counter. The senior staff member met him with professional calm. "Mr. Miller," she said, voice level. "I'm Dana. I oversee operations for this region. I apologize for the inconvenience." Jacob nodded. "I'm not here for apologies." Dana's eyes flicked once to Barry, then back to Jacob. "Your withdrawal is approved," she said, "by our central operations desk." Jacob did not smile. "Good." Dana gestured to the teller. "Proceed." The teller's hands moved quickly now, keys clicking with a rhythm that suggested she wanted this finished cleanly. Forms printed. A confirmation sheet slid out. A receipt. Dana placed a document on the marble and pointed to the line. "This acknowledges the request," she said. "And this confirms delivery timing." Jacob glanced at the paper. "Delivery," Jacob repeated. Dana nodded. "Cash at this magnitude is not handed across a counter. It will be delivered to a secure location you designate, under escort." Jacob's gaze remained steady. "It needs to be today." Dana did not flinch. "It will be today." Jacob signed. No flourish, no hesitation. A simple movement like signing off on a work order. Dana slid the next page forward. Jacob signed again. Barry was still in the lobby, but he might as well have been, behind glass again. He stood near the edge of the space, half ignored, half studied. His eyes stayed locked on Jacob's hands, on the signatures, on the forms he no longer controlled. Jacob could feel Barry watching, could feel the desperation behind that stare. But he did not look back. Not because he was afraid of Barry's anger, because Barry's anger was irrelevant now. Dana handed Jacob a final confirmation sheet. A secure vehicle will meet you at the address listed here within 3 hours. Jacob glanced down. The address was correct. The time was tight. Precise. He nodded once. Thank you. Dana lowered her voice slightly. Mr. Miller, we would like to discuss the earlier interaction. Jacob met her eyes. Send it to counsel. Dana nodded, as if she had expected that. Jacob picked up his tool bag. The pipe wrench stayed in his hand. It was not a symbol. It was his baseline, his reminder. As he turned to leave, Barry stepped forward half a pace, like he might speak. Jacob did not slow down. Barry's voice came out anyway, low and strained. You think you won? Jacob stopped at the doors, not turning fully, just enough so his reply carried. I think you lost, Jacob said. Then he left. Outside, Brickell hit him again with its indifferent movement. The sky was too blue, the street too clean, the world too uninterested in what had just shifted. Jacob walked a half block before he stopped near a planter and took his phone out. He did not call for celebration. He did not call to boast. He called to confirm a mechanism, a single number, a single contact. It rang once. Yeah, a voice answered. Jacob's voice was calm. It's approved. Delivery in 3 hours. A pause. Then, copy. We're in position. Jacob looked up at the towers. Any issue? None, the voice replied. Once escrow confirms, the closing dies. Jacob nodded. Call me when it's funded. He ended the call and pocketed the phone. For a moment, he stood still, listening to the city. No sirens, no shouting, no dramatic music, just traffic and wealth. He started walking. 3 blocks away, the buildings at the center of the deal looked ordinary. Not towers, not luxury. Old brick, faded signage, roll-up doors, service vans parked at angles, a plumbing supply store with sun-bleached letters, an HVAC shop that smelled like metal and sweat even from outside, a small office where electricians ate lunch off styrofoam plates, the kind of places Brickell wanted to erase. Jacob had been inside half of them. He had bought parts there. He had traded numbers with owners. He had listened to them talk about rent hikes and redevelopment opportunities with the same dread Frank had carried in his voice years ago. He paused across the street and watched a man roll a cart of copper fittings toward a van. This was the part no one wrote about in glossy brochures. The infrastructure behind the gloss. The people who made the city function while being treated like clutter. Jacob's phone vibrated. He answered immediately. It's done, the voice said. Escrow funded. Alternative purchase structure confirmed. Jacob exhaled slowly. Not relief exactly. Completion. What about the closing? Jacob asked. A faint laugh on the other end. They're scrambling. Their counsel is already calling. The seller's side just got spooked. The predatory note can't trigger without the original escrow conditions. They're dead in the water. Jacob looked back at the block. The man with the cart kept moving, unaware. The doors kept opening. Work continued. Tradespeople saved, and most of them would never know how close they had come to being erased. Good, Jacob said. Also, the voice added, your filings hit where they needed to. The bank call is already logged. Barry's name is in the chain now. Quietly. Jacob's gaze stayed on the street. He'll deny it. Everyone denies, the voice replied. It won't matter. He touched your account. That's the hook. Jacob ended the call. He stood there another moment, letting the fact settle. The deal was collapsing, not with explosions, but with paperwork, with delayed signatures, with risk committees, with phone calls made in tense conference rooms, with investors asking quiet questions that sounded polite, but were knives. Demolition without noise. Behind him, in the bank, An internal investigation had already begun. Not because Jacob demanded justice in a speech, but because Barry made an error that forced the system to protect itself. Institutions rarely acted from morality. They acted from self-preservation. Barry had become a liability, and in Brickell, liabilities got cut off fast. Jacob walked back toward his truck, parked a few streets away where it wouldn't be ticketed. It was an ordinary vehicle. White, slight rust along the wheel wells, a ladder rack on top. He opened the door, tossed the tool bag onto the passenger seat, and sat for a moment without starting the engine. He thought of Frank again. Not with sentimentality. With a simple acknowledgement of cause and effect. Frank had been right. They didn't lose. They waited you out. Jacob hadn't waited. He had forced the timing. His phone buzzed again. A new message. Short. From counsel. Good work. We have confirmation the freeze order is documented. Risk has escalated. Do not engage further. Jacob read it once, then deleted it. He started the truck. The engine sounded rough for a second, then settled. Honest noise. Mechanical noise. Noise that meant something was working. He pulled into traffic and drove away from Brickell's glass and marble, toward a service call that had been scheduled long before any of this. A condo building with low water pressure on the 15th floor. A complaint from a property manager who would speak sharply until the problem was solved, then forget Jacob's name. Jacob didn't mind. Victory didn't need applause. It needed outcomes. As he merged onto the road, the phone buzzed one last time. A news alert, not yet naming anyone, but hinting at unusual delays in a major Brickell redevelopment closing and internal compliance questions at a private financial institution. Jacob glanced at it briefly, then put the phone face down. He had no interest in watching Barry burn. Barry would burn quietly, the way men like Barry always did, not in flames, but in canceled meetings and unanswered calls, in invitations that stopped coming, in polite smiles that hid avoidance. Radioactive. Jacob drove on. The city remained the city. Towers reflected the sky. People spent money. Deals shifted. Leaks formed in places no one looked until they were forced to. And Jacob returned to work, because work was where he understood the world most clearly. Pressure, joints, failure points. Fix what mattered. Let the rest collapse under its own weight. The condo building on the 15th floor smelled like bleach and money. Not wealth, exactly. Money. The kind that bought a view and a concierge and a monthly HOA fee high enough to make people feel important. The hallways were quiet in the way high-rise hallways were always quiet, padded by carpet and soft lighting. You could hear your own breathing if you listened. Jacob carried his tool bag down the corridor and stopped at Unit 1507. The property manager met him at the door, wearing a fitted polo and impatience like cologne. "You're late," the manager said. Jacob glanced at his watch. "I'm on time." The manager's mouth tightened. "Whatever." The owner's furious. "Pressure keeps dropping. Shower goes cold. It's unacceptable." Jacob stepped inside without commenting. He did not ask who the owner was. He did not care. He knelt by the access panel in the laundry closet, removed 2 screws, and pulled the panel away. He listened. Not with his ears alone. With habit. With years of knowing what systems sounded like when they were pretending they weren't failing. A faint hiss. Not loud enough to trigger alarms, just enough to matter. "You hear that?" Jacob asked. The manager blinked. "Hear what?" Jacob did not answer. He reached into the cavity and ran his fingers along a pipe joint. Moisture came back on his fingertips. "There," Jacob said. The manager leaned in, then recoiled when he saw the dampness. "How did you find that so fast?" Jacob set the panel down gently. It's always the joint. He worked for 10 minutes, tightened, reseated, replaced a worn seal. He moved with calm efficiency, not trying to impress, just trying to fix. When he turned the water back on, the hiss stopped. The pressure stabilized. The system behaved again. The manager watched like he'd just seen a magician. "You're good," he said grudgingly. Jacob wiped his hands with a rag. "It's not magic." The manager hesitated, then tried to make conversation in the way people did when they wanted to feel like they were speaking to someone beneath them, but also wanted a story. "So," the manager said, "you always dress like that? Even when you're, you know." He didn't say billionaire. People like him avoided saying it. Made them feel exposed. Jacob looked at him. "Even when I'm what?" The manager cleared his throat. "Never mind." Jacob packed his tools and left without another word. Down in the parking garage, he sat in his truck for a moment, hands on the wheel, letting the day catch up. It had been 3 days since the bank. Brickell had already started rewriting the event in its own language. Irregularities, procedural issues, internal review. Words designed to remove responsibility from faces and attach it to processes. Jacob had no interest in language that softened consequences. He had received updates from counsel and auditors, clipped and precise. The alternative escrow had held. The predatory acquisition had stalled. The block of businesses had been given breathing room. Not permanent safety yet, but time. And time was always the first thing taken. Barry had not been publicly named. Not yet. But Barry's world did not require public punishment to destroy a man. It ran on private trust, and private trust had already started withdrawing. Jacob's phone buzzed. A message from counsel. One line. Risk escalated. Barry suspended pending investigation. Do not respond to inquiries. Jacob read it once. He did not feel satisfaction. He felt completion, like closing a valve after a repair. He started the truck and drove. Not back to Brickell, away from it. He took the expressway toward an older part of the city where the buildings were lower and the air smelled less like cologne and more like heat and concrete. He drove with the windows down. After a while, the skyline receded behind him, and he turned onto a street that looked ordinary to anyone who hadn't memorized Miami's fault lines. He parked and got out. The old worksite was fenced off now, half forgotten. A few weeds grew where the sidewalk met the chain link. The place where the demolition had happened was not a vacant lot anymore. It wasn't a luxury tower either. It was a sterile mid-rise with beige panels and a name that sounded like a marketing algorithm. A sign out front advertised modern living and upgraded amenities. Jacob stood across the street and looked at it without expression. He could still see the day in his head, not with emotion, with clarity. The exact angle of the beam, the timing, the suddenness. Frank on the ground, trying not to scream. The system had moved on immediately, because that's what it did. It did not mourn. It amortized. Jacob walked along the fence line until he found a spot where the chain link bent slightly, a place where someone had once leaned too hard. He rested his hand on the metal and looked at the building. Again. Frank wasn't buried in this place, but the lesson was. Pressure accumulates in silence. Most people didn't notice until the failure was loud enough to demand attention. Jacob had decided years ago he wouldn't wait for noise. He turned away and walked back toward his truck. As he drove, he passed the block of small businesses that had been targeted. There were no banners celebrating victory, no crowd, no speeches, just open doors. A delivery truck backed into a loading bay. A man in work boots carried a coil of copper tubing on his shoulder. The plumbing supply store sign was still sun-bleached, still ugly, still alive. Jacob parked and stepped out. A woman at the counter looked up. She recognized him, not from magazines, from reality. "You here?" she asked, low, as if the walls might listen. Jacob nodded. It slowed. She exhaled. They were on us, like sharks, all smiles and papers. Jacob looked around the shop. Shelves of fittings, boxes, spools, place built for function. Time buys options, Jacob said. She studied him. You did this? Jacob didn't answer directly. Keep your leases tight. Get your counsel ready. Don't trust anyone who speaks too softly. She nodded slowly. Outside, as Jacob climbed back into his truck, his phone buzzed again. A news alert this time. Private bank faces internal compliance review amid Brickell deal delays. No names, no details, just enough. Jacob glanced at it, then put the phone down. A second buzz. Unknown number. He let it ring once, twice, then answered. This is Jacob. Mr. Miller, a voice said, overly polished. This is Jenna Reyes with South Florida Business Wire. We'd like to comment on the situation at the bank on Brickell Avenue. We understand you were involved. Jacob's eyes stayed on the road ahead. No comment. Mr. Miller, the voice pressed. Is it true the bank manager attempted to freeze your accounts? Jacob paused. No comment. Do you think this ties into? Jacob ended the call. He did not block the number. He did not engage. Attention was a tool like anything else. He used it when necessary. He did not feed it. The truck moved through traffic, past glass, and then past concrete, until he reached another job site. This one was smaller. A restaurant near the water. Old pipes. Steady leaks. The kind that made a business bleed money slowly until it failed. Jacob pulled in and parked. As he got out, he saw a figure near the entrance. A man in a suit, too polished for this neighborhood, standing awkwardly, hands empty, posture stiff like he was pretending he belonged. Barry. Jacob stopped for a moment, studying him from a distance. Barry looked thinner. Not physically, but socially. The kind of thinning that happened when people stopped returning your calls. His suit was still expensive, but it looked less like armor and more like costume. Barry took a step forward. Jacob, he said. Voice, controlled, but weaker than before. Jacob did not move closer. Barry swallowed. We need to talk. Jacob nodded toward the restaurant door. I'm working. Barry's jaw tightened. Of course you are. Jacob waited. Barry's eyes flicked to the tool bag in Jacob's hand, to the pipe wrench hooked at Jacob's belt now. I didn't know, Barry said quietly. Jacob blinked once. You did. Barry's face twitched. I mean, I didn't know it would go like this. Jacob's voice remained flat. You assumed the system would protect you. Barry looked away for a moment, then back. They've suspended me. Jacob nodded. That's what happens when you become a risk. Barry's nostrils flared slightly, anger fighting humiliation. You did this. Jacob's gaze stayed steady. You did. Barry stepped closer, desperation creeping in. What do you want? Money? A settlement? If you think I'm going down alone, you're... Jacob raised a hand slightly, not to threaten, but to stop the noise. I don't want your money, Jacob said. Barry froze. Jacob continued, voice calm. I wanted the deal stopped. I wanted the block protected. I wanted a record of what you do when you think no one is watching. Barry's mouth opened, closed. He looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find a place to stand. You're not some hero, Barry said finally, weakly. Jacob nodded once. Correct. Barry's eyes narrowed. Then what are you? Jacob looked at him for a long beat. A plumber, Jacob said. Barry's face tightened. That's not... Jacob cut in quietly. It is. He took a step toward the restaurant door. Barry's voice cracked slightly. You ruined me. Jacob paused at the entrance and turned just enough so the answer would land. No, Jacob said. You were leaking. I just pointed at the joint. Barry stared at him, breathing harder now. Jacob's tone stayed simple. You can hide leaks with paint. You can threaten the person who notices. But pressure doesn't care. Pressure finds the weak point. Barry's shoulders sagged. Is that supposed to be your philosophy? Jacob shrugged. It's plumbing. Then he went inside. The restaurant manager met him with frantic energy, explaining how the kitchen sink backed up twice a day, how the smell was driving customers away. Jacob listened, nodded, followed the pipes. Under the floorboards in a cramped access space, he found the issue quickly. A slow leak near a joint, corrosion spreading outward like a quiet infection. It had been ignored because it wasn't dramatic. Jacob tightened the fitting, replaced a section, sealed it properly. The smell faded. The flow returned. When he climbed back out, the manager smiled with relief. You're a lifesaver. Jacob wiped his hands. No. He packed his tools. Outside, the sky was turning orange at the edges, the day closing like a file. He walked to his truck. Barry was gone. Brickell would keep building towers. Banks would keep whispering. Men like Barry would keep trying to control outcomes with gatekeeping and arrogance. But Jacob had learned something long ago in the trade, something the powerful rarely understood until it was too late. Systems weren't defeated with speeches. They were defeated with precision, with documentation, with pressure applied at the right point. Jacob started the truck and drove toward the next call. Another leak somewhere, small enough to ignore until it wasn't. And Jacob would fix it, not because he needed recognition, but because fixing what mattered was the only form of power he trusted. Some stories end with explosions, public victories, loud revenge. This one ended the way real justice usually does, quietly, with the work continuing the next day. Jacob did not change the world with a speech. He fixed one failure point, then moved on to the next. Looking back, do you think you would have done the same? Chosen competence over recognition, outcomes over applause, responsibility over ego. Would you have walked away once the damage was exposed, or stayed to make sure the leak was truly sealed? Your thoughts matter to us. Share what this story made you feel, and which moment stayed with you the longest. If this story moved you, take a moment to subscribe to Stories That Touch and leave a comment below. Your support helps us bring more stories that stay with you long after they end.